one of the most awful and just reprehensible parts of our experience is what we call deactivation. And this just translates into being fired by an app. And so we are representing drivers in droves, by the hundreds, as a matter of fact, that wake up one day, they get ready for work, they kiss their loved ones goodbye, they go gas up their car, they wash their car, they get ready, they flip on their app, and there's this big red exclamation point that says your account has been put on hold. And this process oftentimes is done by artificial intelligence, by an algorithm that decides that you no longer deserve your job.
Hey everybody, thanks for joining us on Policy for the People. I am Juan Carlos Ordóñez. There's a good chance that you've used Uber or Lyft to get somewhere. But while many of us are familiar with these services, few of us know the challenges that come with this line of work, the low pay and lack of protections. Today on this show, we're exploring what working conditions are like for rideshare drivers and what the state of Oregon can do to improve those working conditions. My guests are Nathaniel Hudson-Hartman and Joe Jackson. They're both rideshare drivers here in Oregon and organizers with Drivers Union Oregon. Hi, Nathaniel, Joe. Welcome to Policy for the People. How are you?
Well, thank you.
I am blessed, Juan Carlos. It is so great to be with you. Thank you for having us. Been looking forward to this for a long time.
Well, thank you for making the time. Both of you are involved with Drivers Union Oregon. What is Drivers Union Oregon, and how did you come to get involved in this organization?
You know, Joe and I are longtime rideshare drivers. We joke that we have almost 20 years of experience between the two of us. I've been driving for 8 years. Joe's been driving for 10. And so, we have really just, we've driven full time, part time. We've been driven a long time. And, we have connected and been part of building this community of rideshare drivers in our state, which is, no small feat, since it's like herding cats. We're all kind of in our own little bubbles in our cars. So it's amazing that, rideshare drivers have come together to, build this community, and just, come together and really just share knowledge and, really unite and, try to make this the best experience that we can. But, we'll obviously talk more about these, but, just like with any job, any career path, we face challenges out there. And so, we really come together over those challenges. But it's not just us, drivers all over the world have come together to really look at, like, hey, what's going on? Why are these things happening? What can we do to make this experience better for everyone, not just for Uber and Lyft? And so back in 2014, I believe, drivers in Washington State came together and said, well, something's not right here. We are driving our cars into the ground. We are 100% responsible for our costs, for, our maintenance and all that stuff. And meanwhile, Uber and Lyft are just taking an unfair and disproportionate percentage of what the riders are paying, when drivers out there are, have the lion's share of the cost and the risk. So what can we do about it? And so drivers came together, and we can talk a little bit more about this if you like, but the short of it is, drivers came together and formed what is known as the Drivers Union Washington. And so, they just, over the course of years and years, just united, started building power in the community and advocating and fighting for changes. And so a couple years ago, our Oregon chapter of Drivers Union was founded. And so, drivers had been organizing in Oregon for a long time. But it's only within the last couple of years that we have formed our Oregon chapter. So Drivers Union Oregon, we are an independent, up and coming, very strong and very galvanized collection. I like to call us a merry band of rideshare drivers, uniting, moving together, and fighting for beneficial changes for a more sustainable, more equitable rideshare experience, for Oregonians.
I definitely want to explore the challenges that rideshare drivers are experiencing. Before we get to that, though, I wanted to know a little bit about your experience and how you came to be a rideshare driver. And Joe, I wonder if you can begin by sharing a little bit about your story.
I became a rideshare driver in June of 2015. Um, and my reasoning for it was I actually lost a very close friend in unfortunately a DUI situation. Somebody had struck the side of the truck that she was riding in, and she died on the scene. So I started driving because I said, hey, if the option is always there for somebody to get home, then there is no reason that a death like this should happen. Um, and really, like, that sort of ignited my passion towards getting people home safely and pushing to, always make sure that somebody is available to get people home. And I've expanded on that from, just being a designated driver to, as rideshare drivers, we're a designated driver. We're an ambulance, we're therapists. We do everything for our passengers. Um, and it's
DJs
just,
as well. I've heard good
yeah,
music on rides.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Portable DJs. So, we are essential, and we love doing what we do.
Nathaniel, do you want to share a little bit?
Yeah, thank you. But before I do that, I just want to we want to give a huge shout out. Well, we want to give out multiple shout outs. First and foremost, we want to shout out our amazing statewide driver community. Folks of all ages, all different socioeconomic backgrounds, all out there plugging away, providing, as Joe said, these essential services to folks that really depend on us. And it is a challenging occupation. Driving, no matter what folks say, rideshare driving is not an easy job. It is something that a lot of folks can do, but it is not, as Joe mentioned, we're wearing a lot of hats. There's a lot of challenges. There's a lot of dangers and a lot of risks. It's one of the most dangerous professions there is. And it's one of the professions, that there is that drivers just have the lack of protections out there. And it's just very unpredictable. So just want to give a huge shout out to the driver community. And also a big shout out to the community, our community allies as well. Oregon Center for Public Policy is one of them. Y'all belong to, are part of our Fair Rides Oregon coalition. And, without our community allies, yourself included, we would not be where we are right now. So just want to give those shout outs real quick. My experience. So I have been almost a lifer in the service industry. I love people. I love being of service to people. I've worked just about every fast food job there is. But my foray really breaking into the service industry was when I became a server, and started waiting tables, and just, that interaction, you're hosting somebody, you're taking care of them, you're providing them with like a really nice experience. You're kind of like painting a picture in the background. You're not the forefront, but you're kind of in the background, making sure that the ambience is good. And I just really loved that element. And I love to drive. I love to take road trips. So I'm a Western New York native. I moved to Oregon in 2017. And I quickly realized that the cost of living here was much higher than it was in my little city back home. So I was working a W-2 gig. I worked for the American Red Cross at the time. So I've always been in this like nonprofit sector, but also this service industry sector. And so when I moved to Oregon, I thought, well, what can I do? Because I need to supplement my income. And we didn't have Uber and Lyft back home at the time, but I kept hearing all the radio advertisements, and I was like, yeah, this could be fun. Learn the city, make some money, and I got in and I was hooked. I like from the time I got my car registered, started taking rides, I was hooked. And honestly, that's part of the experience, which we can, also kind of dive deeper into. But it's a very gamified and very gamblified experience. And so it's easy once you first start driving. Your bells and whistles, colors, pictograms, you're making money. But it's also really fun. And as Joe mentioned, like, I didn't realize what it was until I gave a ride to someone who was just assaulted. And I was their safe ride home, not a bus that, not an ambulance, but a rideshare. They were in the back seat. They started crying, and I asked them what happened. They had just been assaulted, and they just needed somebody to talk to, and they needed a safe ride home. And that was kind of the moment where it became very clear to me that we weren't just giving people rides home from the bar after a night of drinking, which, by the way, is an essential service in and of itself, as Joe mentioned, keeping drunk drivers off of the road. But, bringing people to doctor's appointments, domestic victims of domestic violence, unsheltered folks, that was like my badge of honor. And from that moment forward, I knew that this was just kind of part of God's plan for me to be of service to the community. And just be a force for good. And it was the flexibility and some of the things in our experience that allow you to work around your life, not the other way around. Lots of drivers are caring for caring for sick loved ones, caring for their families. And so traditional W-2 employment doesn't always really fit into that. And that was my experience. After 13 years of W-2 world, it just wasn't fitting my schedule. I had some family, some health issues. My father passed away. And I just quickly realized that this, limited bereavement and paid time off just wasn't working. So I decided to become a full-time rideshare driver. And in doing so, it opened my eyes to just how hard it is out there to be a full-time driver and to make ends meet. So, everything has kind of led to the next thing.
Let's talk about those challenges that come with the job. What are the main challenges that rideshare drivers face in common that are pretty typical? And Joe, do you want to start us off with your perspective?
Sure. So I think that one of the main challenges of this work versus other work is um, just the pay and how it's changed over the years. When I first started driving for rideshare, um, not only was I contractually guaranteed 80% of what the passenger was paying, but it was a fairly good, living wage at the time. And in comparatively, gas prices were a bit lower back then, in the like mid $2 to $3 range versus what it is now. Um, Pay since then has more than halved, and our portion is less than half of what the passenger pays. So that it's like the cost of the fares have gone up. The cost of living has gone up. The cost of maintenance on your vehicle has gone up, as well as just operating the vehicle. And yet our pay has gone way down. And so one of the biggest challenges is you start out doing this job that's really great. And then you very suddenly, without even realizing it, are working more than full time just to make ends meet.
How long are the hours then that you have to work in order to pay for the essentials? Do you have a sense?
Well, given that I live on the third floor apartment, which carries a slight discount, and I have a roommate, I only have to work roughly about 55 to 60 hours a week.
That's a lot. How about you, Nathaniel? What experiences have you had with regard to the pay structure?
I mean, Joe pretty much laid it out. I mean, we were guaranteed at least 80% of the fare, which is fair considering that we are burdened and shouldered with all of the cost. And you look at how much Uber and Lyft have automated their processes, outsourced customer support, which is a joke, and how many employees they have fired, and how these companies have leaned out. And all you have to do is look at their financials to see that their profitability has been paved on the backs of the essential workers, of the drivers. 80% was fair, but nowadays we're lucky to get even half. And Uber and Lyft are really good at putting these falsehoods out, these misperceptions and false narratives that drivers are earning no less than 70% of the fare, or drivers are earning an average of $30 an hour. And this couldn't be farther from the truth, because all of these things come with asterisks. So the erosion of driver pay is a big one. Couple that with the inflation of rider fares alongside. One of the biggest misconceptions that Uber and Lyft put out there, and I'm sure we'll get more into this once we start talking about legislation, is that rider fares will go up if driver pay goes up. But we have screenshots for days that show that passengers are paying upwards of $90 to $100 per ride, and drivers are earning, look at that, 13%. Passenger paid $109. The driver only got 14%. These are all recent trips that are happening in the Rose City. And so this is why drivers in Oregon and everywhere deserve fair pay. Some of the other challenges, that we definitely want to mention, it starts with pay, obviously. But because of this low pay and the long hours that drivers are working, we're out there not just driving our cars into the ground, but driving ourselves into the ground. And Joe and I, and a lot of our drivers have firsthand experience of the mental and physical toll that takes, and the public safety crisis that can bring on. When you got tired drivers out there that are working these long hours, they're not fresh, they're not rested, and then they get sick. And because, and then we don't have the safety nets that other workers enjoy, like paid sick leave, family medical leave, workers' compensation, unemployment insurance. And, so we've been systematically excluded from a lot of these benefits programs that other workers enjoy. But one of the most awful and just reprehensible parts of our experience is what we call deactivation. And this just translates into being fired by an app. And so we are representing drivers in droves, by the hundreds, as a matter of fact, that wake up one day, they get ready for work, they kiss their loved ones goodbye, they go gas up their car, they wash their car, they get ready, they flip on their app, and there's this big red exclamation point that says your account has been put on hold. And this process oftentimes is done by artificial intelligence, by an algorithm that decides that you no longer deserve your job. And there is oftentimes no clear explanation why. And we have research that suggests this affects a disproportionate number of drivers that come from Black, brown, and immigrant communities. And it's even worse because the drivers in those cases do not have the right to representation, and the chat support that you end up texting with to try to get your job back is done 100% in English. So for a driver, and a large percentage of our workforce, are immigrants, folks that maybe English is their second, third, or fourth language, as I'm sure you can imagine. It attracts, and the barrier to entry is very low for those folks. This is just a frustrating and culturally biased process. And even Joe and I mean, we were born here. Our English is fairly decent. We've both been wrongfully deactivated, each one of us.
And have a hard time understanding the chatbots that they use.
Yeah. I mean, my story has been pretty well documented by now, but the short of it is, my father passed away. I was out there earning money to try to pay for my ticket home. I was grief stricken. I had to cancel a trip, and I received a complaint, and I was deactivated. My account was put on hold. I was told I have one chance to appeal. I can submit documentation. I sent them my father's death certificate, which was, let's face it, I didn't have to do that, but I chose to. but I was found to have generically violated their terms of service. And so we have drivers out there that are being deactivated for false complaints, but also from like background checks that are taking too long, or app glitches, or I'm representing a driver right now who legally changed their name. And something came up on their background check, and Uber falsely accused them of intentionally falsifying documents. These are heinous accusations, and just drivers just have no pathway. Wrongfully deactivated drivers just have no pathway to get their jobs back. And so we're incentivized to buy these expensive cars with the possibility and the promise of making good money, working around our schedule and all these things, only to just have the rug pulled out from underneath you by an algorithm.
Joe, what was your experience when you were deactivated? What happened?
I was deactivated due to a false complaint. I had a passenger who was, yelling out my window and things like that. And when I rolled up my window and I turned on the window lock so they couldn't roll it down and yell at people on the street anymore, they started yelling at me and started telling me that they're going to call Uber and tell them that I was drunk driving. Lo and behold, about 20 minutes after this trip, my account was deactivated. Thankfully, I knew the reason why, so I went into the local police station and did a voluntary breathalyzer, took the printout and sent it to them just preemptively. A lot of drivers don't have the benefit of being able to do that because it doesn't provide you a reason when your account is placed on hold or if you're deactivated. I did so preemptively simply because that's what the passenger was yelling he was going to do, threatening to do. I also sent a picture of my Alcoholics Anonymous token, which was at 7 years at the time. I'm now coming up on 11. It was offensive to me to be accused of drunk driving when I had done so much for myself to never drink again.
Yeah, and that same driver I was just telling you about, who legally changed their name, was deactivated on Uber, and on Lyft they were also falsely accused of drunk driving by a drunk passenger. And this driver is Muslim and has never touched a drop of alcohol in their life. But no amount of explaining this to a chatbot will get your job back.
For the listeners who may not be aware of the full context here, I mean, getting deactivated and all of a sudden not being able to earn money through rides, there's no UI system for unemployment insurance system for rideshare drivers. There's little in the way of a safety net in the country. Like, what's the economic impact on the driver and their families?
Tremendous. That driver who I just mentioned has a family of 4. Rideshare is their sole source of income, and so they are amassing, copious amounts of credit card debt. I mean, we have drivers now that have been deactivated that are, in danger of losing their homes because, again, we are incentivized to buy these expensive cars. So you purchase, and especially because the pay is so low, you end up kind of getting into this, this trap of being incentivized to purchase the more expensive car to make more money. And so you end up oftentimes incurring a car note. And so if you get deactivated, there goes your income. There goes your car payment, there, goes your interest. And so the economic injury and hardship that drivers are facing out there, particularly as Joe mentioned, as the expenses have gone up tremendously, can be astronomical.
You touched on this a little bit earlier, Nathaniel, but the other issue, or at least another issue that's prominent, is paid leave, access to paid leave. I wonder if you can talk about why it's so important. Many workers in Oregon now can access paid leave, but rideshare drivers and a lot of gig workers can't. Can you say something about why it's so important? Joe, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I'll take this one. So my son is coming up on a year old, actually, in just about a week and a half is his first birthday. And last year, right around this time, actually, um, with my wife being very pregnant and me living in Salem but working in Portland, I was kind of taking risks in going to work because you never know when she's going to go into labor. And so I made the decision to actually stay home and be there so that I can take her to the hospital and be there for the birth of my child so that I can welcome him into the world. But I did so at great risk without any kind of paid family medical leave. Um, I had no income. And so when I decided to stay home to welcome my child into the world, I was also welcoming him to the potential risk of homelessness. Um, Thankfully, I didn't. A close friend of mine actually covered the rent, and it wasn't until my son was 6 months old that I was able to pay him back for that loan. But it was so awful to have to make a decision like that, and I'm so happy that I made the decision that I did, because welcoming my son into this world is a once in a lifetime experience, and I almost missed it just to pay the bills.
Well, another issue that I've seen the drivers union Oregon raise is the issue of transparency. Can you talk about what you mean by transparency in this context, and why it's an important factor as well in terms of working conditions?
Absolutely. Thank you, Juan Carlos. And I really appreciate you bringing this up. Because look, we know it, the companies, TNCs, which by the way, for those of you listening, TNC stands for Transportation Network Company. That's what Uber and Lyft are considered. So if we talk about TNCs, we're talking about Uber, Lyft, any other rideshare company that operates within our state or, municipality. So yes, the TNCs know it. We know it. Drivers know it. I don't know if the passengers always know it. But passengers and drivers are both getting the short end of the stick at the expense of the TNCs. What I mean by that is, I think I flipped my screen around and showed you those screenshots. Now, drivers are getting this data, right? But passengers are not getting this data. Passengers have oftentimes no idea how much of their fare is going to the driver and how much is not. And so, and also for drivers, this information used to be very readily available to us, but over the years, the companies have intentionally masqueraded or just hidden it completely. So, you used to be able to just finish a ride, flip your app on and see, oh, the passenger paid this, I got that. But that has been masked in subversive numerology and in like on Uber, for example, you have to log into the Uber website, which is a separate process. So transparency is something that we are advocating for, not just for the drivers to be able to make informed decisions, but our passengers as well. We're shameless social media plug alert. At Drivers Union OR. I know we're going to get that to that a little later. But if you follow us on TikTok, we post screenshots. And we have folks from all over the world that are like, what? I didn't realize the driver wasn't making most of that. Or, wow, that passenger paid how much? And, that goes back to how much Uber and Lyft like to, put, a fearmonger our lawmakers into thinking that if they vote for a piece of legislation that is going to give drivers more equitable, share of the pay, that the riders aren't going to be able to afford the service. But we can clearly see here that they're already being price gouged, and then the drivers are just being paid a very little portion out of that, right? And so the transparency thing is huge. Our consumers, without drivers, there is no Uber and Lyft, but without our passengers, there is no Uber and Lyft either. And none of us stand to gain anything, right? But unfortunately, Uber and Lyft have just put that aside and they conveniently use the riders as bargaining chips. We've seen it in other states. We saw it in our state during our legislative session for SB 1166. That they are more than happy to use them when it's convenient for them, but they have no problem overcharging our customers. But they just use them when it's convenient for them to do so. So our consumers deserve and demand transparency, and so the pay transparency thing is big. As a matter of fact, in Colorado, this was also something, and in Washington State, these are big legislative campaigns that drivers are advocating for as well, so that our customers are able to make informed decisions and are able to know that there is also fairness and equity in the space.
So you mentioned Senate Bill 1166. This was legislation introduced in the legislative session that ended earlier this year. Can you talk about what this bill would have done, its main provisions, and what happened to the bill?
So this bill would have, first and foremost, established a fair pay standard for drivers. It would have increased the pay from a very low amount in the Portland area, about 70 cents per mile, to a pay that actually matches Washington. For all the drivers watching out there, you're making more money in Washington State because of successful legislation. So when you're driving in Vancouver, you're making $1.34 versus that 70 cents down in Portland, including, the per minute price would also be going up from its current price. Beyond the fair pay standard, it was also going to include a sick pay benefit, which would automatically accrue based on the passenger's time in the back seat of your car. So you spend 30 hours with a passenger and you accrue 1 hour of sick pay, and it would just automatically accrue and be very easily accessible, easily redeemable for our drivers who, again, as it's been stated, oftentimes struggle with understanding, programs and other things that might or might not be available. Beyond that, a just cause standard for deactivation cases. So no driver could be deactivated without just cause. And those standards would give arbitrators a tool to use in helping drivers be reactivated in the case of a wrongful deactivation.
There's just a couple things I want to add in terms of what SB 1166 was going to do. In terms of the pay for SB 1166, and yeah, Joe did a really great job of laying that out. So rideshare drivers are currently paid, and I'm glad this came up because this is definitely something that's kind of a little bit of mystery to some folks. So we are paid similarly to like a taxi driver, only when we have a passenger in the car, and there's a per mile per minute rate. What we're not paid for is the unpaid waiting time, the time to go pick up a passenger. And so it's really important for that time that we're being paid with the passenger to be higher, but in line with Washington State, comparable markets, Portland and Vancouver in the same market. So, this was it really made a lot of sense for us to, for those rates to be where they are now. And then the last thing that the bill was going to do was also give the riders and drivers that pay transparency. So that way they would be provided a receipt and show exactly how much the driver's getting versus how much the companies are taking. So I just wanted to mention that last thing about SB 1166.
So going back to your experience inside the state capitol, how was the bill received, and what are your thoughts having gone through a legislative session trying to put forward a bill?
Yeah, so, I feel like the bill was actually well received. A lot of the folks that we talked to, I felt like we were building allies as we were going through and speaking with these lawmakers. they loved the concepts, and they loved that, this whole package could really just improve the lives of so many drivers throughout the state and in their local districts.
I just want to add to that, and surprisingly, it was also supported by Uber and Lyft, if you can believe it. You know, we had some conversations, with our legislative champion, Senator Casey Jama, Senate Majority Leader Casey Jama, and with the TNCs, and we got feedback from them that they were absolutely in support of a minimum wage floor for drivers, and transparency, and some deactivation rights for drivers. We definitely got feedback from them that this was not something that they were like, holy crap, like we can't see this thing coming to fruition. So unfortunately, in typical form, they doubled back and put subversive messaging out there, some sort of attack ads a little bit within in the form of one pagers, very misleading information, after saying that they supported it, which is very typical for them. They send messaging out to riders and drivers, making it seem like we will, all these negative effects will happen, so speak out to your lawmaker against drivers getting fair pay. So this was definitely not expected, and we know that this is exactly what their playbook is, but there definitely was some support there from the companies, if you can believe it.
So what comes next? What does Drivers Union Oregon have planned in terms of moving forward legislation?
We're definitely planning on returning to Salem. We're wanting to come back with something very similar to what we've tried for, and I think as far as what happened with SB 1166. It has to do with the enforcement of the rules in the bill. Bureau of Labor and Industries is a pretty underfunded organization, so they needed a few employees to handle enforcing our bill, and to handle the potential influx of wage complaints, etc. And with the financial situation in Oregon, they didn't want to give any money to Bully for a new program.
We are trying to instill in our driver community, and really embrace the idea of controlling the things you can, letting go of the things that you can't. And obviously, state funding is not something that any of us have any clout or any juice, or we have absolutely no control over whether funds are going to be allocated for a new program, for a new bill like ours, which was Oregon's first ever historic rideshare protection package. I mean, we had no control over that, but the things that we did and the things that we still do are coming out, making our voices heard, building power and unity, and just continuing to lean into our allies like Oregon Center for Public Policy, Unite Oregon, SEIU Local 503, to name a few. I mean, a lot of these folks showed up really huge for us at our public hearing that we had, and just continuing to support us and help us, and mobilizing our workers, and making our voices heard. I mean, we packed, we had an overflow room for our public hearing. I mean, we packed 2 of those rooms wearing our blue shirts. It was really empowering, and that's what our driver community is really embracing. The fact that we have the power to change history, to see these changes that we want to happen. Martin Luther King is one of my favorite, one of my greatest inspirations, and he said, change does not roll in on the wheels of inevitability. It comes through continuous struggle. And combine that with my other hero, one of my other heroes, Frederick Douglass, from my hometown. If there is no struggle, there is no progress. And so those two really, there's a real synergy there. And of course, drivers, our work is, we're rolling everywhere, right? And so that is really, really applies to what we want to do. So, the future, I think, is we're encouraged. We're very resilient, folks, right? Like no one who has driven for as long as we have and who has, dealt with, wrongful deactivations, you know, passengers getting sick in your car every now and again, a traffic accident, just there are so many things that can dissuade you from wanting to continue in this work, the marginalization, the mind games, the gamification, the gamblification, all these things, we are a resilient bunch. And so like no amount of games, no amount of adversity is going to, cause us to waver and is to cause us to give up.
Speaking of the struggle, certainly one of the things that gives me the most hope right now in these sort of difficult times is that we have seen a lot of new energy in the labor movement. I wonder how you see the rideshare drivers and the drivers union fitting within this larger struggle of the labor movement. It seems that if we are going to have an economy that works for everybody, we need to see a robust labor movement. I wonder how you see your union fitting within this context.
Yes, we need a robust labor movement, and Drivers Union Oregon, we're so proud. We're so proud to be a part of that. Joe and I have so many conversations with folks that are in other unions, and they're like, wait, there's a drivers union, rideshare drivers? You guys are organizing? Like, good, go you, good for you. Like, how can we help? And it's this idea of solidarity. We preach it all the time to our driver community. We have, been on the strike lines with, IAM Local 63, the Boeing machinists, when they were striking, Oregon Nurses Association at Providence St. V's before they got their new contract. There's a the farm workers, boycott that's happening, next week. We're proud to be part of the labor movement, and we're trying to help as much as we can. Obviously, our organizing takes a lot of our bandwidth, but any opportunity that we get to show up in solidarity with SEIU Local 503 or anybody who is fighting the same fight as us, we're proud to stand with, and it's been amazing to see the support that we've been shown as well in our fight.
So for the listeners who may want to get in touch with Drivers Union Oregon, or for other drivers who may want to get in touch, what can they do? Where can they go?
You can find us pretty easily. If you search Drivers Union Oregon, you can find our website, which is driversunionor.org. We are on all major social media platforms. If you're a driver listening to this, we are fighting for better pay. Come fight with us. We're going to keep fighting, and we're not going to stop until we get, as much, there's a lot of things that we're advocating for drivers, fair pay, protections, benefits, a voice, driver safety, these are our priorities, and, fight with us. And anybody else, who's not a driver that wants to get involved, if you are interested in joining our coalition or learning more, please contact us. We would love to schedule a meeting with you to discuss that more. And, I think the last thing I would say is, a lot of us use the service. I still take rides every now and again when I need them, and also to talk to other drivers. Please share what you've heard here. Just talk to your driver, tell them we have a union, Drivers Union Oregon. Drivers are fighting for better pay, and this is how we do it.
Well, Nathaniel and Joe, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Juan Carlos. Thanks for having us. And again, shout out to all the drivers. Shout out to all of our community allies. Thanks for having us. And when we fight,
we win.
We win.